let's wait and save it for the show.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're good, guys. Stand by.
Welcome to Bloody Good Horror, covering the best and worst of the horror genre since Halloween 2007. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a very evil episode of Bloody Good Horror. My name's Eric, and I'll be your host for this evening, where we will be discussing Lords of Chaos. Joe has been waiting for this for literally years, and now it's happening on the show.
Very true.
Joe, on a scale of 1 to turgid, how excited are you tonight?
I'd go 12, maybe
12.
even 13.
Yeah. I just have so many questions that I hope we get to get to tonight. First up,
I'm excited to be a part of them.
Joining me tonight on the show, coming to us from Indianapolis. Not really, just Indiana. Please welcome Casey.
Hello.
Next up on the show, coming to us from Texas. Please welcome John Sheldon. You're muted.
He's muted.
Don't they teach you how to unmute on Sophisticult? Still muted.
Still very much muted. Maybe just not plugged in altogether.
Anyway, last up here tonight on the show. This was I'll be honest, Joe. I would have never thought to do this movie on the show, but I'm glad we did, and it was all because of you, buddy. Please welcome Joe to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited. I mean, this movie's kind of been in the works for years, and announced actually filming 2.5 years ago. So I'm very excited.
Yeah.
To
so
see
this is for the uninitiated. This is Lords of Chaos, and this is about correct me, Joe, if I'm messing up any of these details here. This is about a Norwegian black metal band. Black metal, is that the correct term? Or is it?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Named Mayhem, who in the early 90s, I believe, one of the members murdered another one, and then there was all this other stuff that happened before that. There was also a spate of church burnings that they were connected to on some level, and just it was causing all this stuff sort of combined was causing this hysteria in Norway at the time about Satanists and black metal and all this kind of stuff that was scaring the straight, so to speak.
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. I mean,
scaring the straight / completely titillating young Joe in upstate New York.
Well, the weird thing is, and we'll talk about it more, when all this stuff was going on, it was in the early 90s. I knew nothing about this genre of music, and it wasn't until a few years later when I moved to New York and a buddy of mine gave me a copy of the book that I really kind of got into it and sort of delved
okay,
in.
so you weren't aware of this as it was happening, or when that, because there's a big point in the movie made about this magazine article in this British metal magazine. You said you read that though?
No, so it's Kerrang! Magazine, which at the time and was kind of the big metal magazine. We had Hit Parader and Circus, but that was more talking about Poison and Rat and hair metal and stuff. This one kind of Kerrang! Really more focused on real metal, not guys running around picking up women on Sunset Strip and stuff. It was the real deal.
What do they call it in this movie? Life metal?
Yeah, life metal. I mean, we can get into it more.
Oh, please, let's talk about all the different metal genres. You know, it's one of my favorite topics.
Black metal started almost as the kind of punk of Norway, whereas punk was kind of this, against these big arena rock and Led Zeppelin and Yes and bands like that. Black metal kind of started as to kind of going against your Metallicas and Slayers and things like that, where there was all this produced metal that was shiny and glossy. Like they were doing stuff like they kind of showed in the movie, like Varg when he's recording his first album, he's like, just put the mic in the center of the room, like I don't care, find the shittiest one that you have and let's just record it that way. Like it was supposed to sound like shitty, for lack of a better
It's
word.
just like death, man. It's like death.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
I listened, Joe, to a Mayhem album today. Well, okay, listen, that's a lie. I listened to a Mayhem song today.
Mm-hmm.
It would from what appeared to be like the Mayhem album, the old, like, I don't know, it was like 93 or 4 or something like that.
Was it D Mortes? I can't pronounce it, but yeah,
it's that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like all of your music I've ever tried to listen to, it did in fact hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
It's the I can handle the music to a certain extent because there is a certain kind of like melodicness to it, melodicity. But it for me with this kind of stuff, it's when the vocals come in and they just come in like growling like what I can only think of as like a brown note, where it just gets you in your gut. Like it doesn't feel good, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, and to the point of the bands, like that would be probably like a compliment to them. Like that's kind of what they're going for. Like there's another book.
Okay, I get that. What I don't understand, what I'm fascinated by, let's say, is then the person on the other end getting enjoyment out of it. Like I remember, do you remember Comedians of Comedy when it was the tour? Like it was like Patton Oswalt, Brian Posehn, Maria Bamford, and they did like a reality show about it. And there was a lot about Brian Posehn being like a huge metalhead. Yeah. And he was like listening to this shit before his performance. It was just ear murder. But he was telling them how it relaxes him. And that idea has always fascinated me because there's got to be something to that, right? Like, well, yeah. So let's paint the picture here, Joe. It's 1993. Young Joe is what, like 14, 13?
Yeah, about.
And you're opening yourself to this world of metal. Are you angry listening to this stuff, Joe? Do you find it cathartic and relaxing? Is it pure fascination? Like what's going on in young little Joey's head?
I think for a lot of folks that listen to metal, it starts as like oh, this is like rebellious, like, you know, and especially back in like the early 90s and like late 80s, it was the kind of stuff that you would see on like a talk show where, you know, mothers were scared of it. And, you know, it's kind of like,
well, there's a real similar thread between that and horror films, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And Dungeons and Dragons.
Sure.
Yeah. And like later on, like ICP for kids, like, or, you know, bands that anything that, you know, you're not supposed to be listening to, you kind of get fascinated with.
I mentioned this, but my metal was Eminem when I was like 17.
Yeah, sure. So I don't know. I mean, I started listening to bands like Metallica and Anthrax, and like Anthrax was a big one because they actually had like a couple rap songs. So, and that you listen to that, then all of a sudden you let the tape keep playing, and you know they've got like straight up like thrash songs. Like it, I don't know. I was thinking when Sheldon was sending his emails about how, you know, some of this stuff is terrible. I don't have an argument for it. Like it's just it kind of, you know, I just enjoy the music. I don't know. I don't know
like
how to...
evil.
Does it get you hype or does it relax you?
I can't say it relaxes me, although like I can listen to stuff at work and just like concentrate and focus and get stuff done. But I don't know if it like specifically relaxes me. Like I wouldn't put this on and then like doze off to sleep or something.
You know what I do like, Joe? 3 Inches of Blood.
Yeah.
I enjoy the kind of metal that these guys really hate.
Yeah.
In fact, they call out speed metal by name in this movie as being lame.
Yeah, but on the flip side, like, and
they refer to it. Don't they refer to it as like that Swedish shit or something like that?
I don't know.
What the hell was it?
I mean,
yeah, they make some reference to like some other Scandinavian country in their horseshit metal.
But I mean, if you, especially in the book Lords of Chaos, they kind of talk about the bands that influence these guys, and a lot of it is like Motorhead and like, you know,
they're name dropped too. They're at a Motorhead concert at one point.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's a weird line between like what they find acceptable and what isn't, you know.
Well, isn't that the whole?
They don't like the Scorpions.
Yeah.
Isn't that the whole thing? Isn't that the whole thing about? I mean, pop culture in general, but metal fans, that there's this constant drawing of arbitrary lines that are just different depending on what you like.
Well, yeah, like the moment a band becomes popular, you know, you turn their back on them. That's why, you know, like Metallica, like so many folks that like metal have kind of shunned them away. But they're still
They
putting up
sold
good
out.
Yeah, exactly. But
I'm into Metallica, but that's probably why cool people don't like them.
yeah.
If I'm into your band, that means it's not cool.
Mm-hmm.
Straight up. Did you bring me any metal pictures? Any pictures of Metal Joe?
Oh God, I can send you tons.
Not like you and your face paint. I want like 14-year-old denim jacket Joe, like that era.
Oh, I don't think I have those like on the actual computer.
Come on, Joe.
I can send you tons of pictures of these bands though.
Yeah, that's okay. I really just want to delve. Well, really, I'm actually regretting now that we didn't do a full Eric show spinoff where I just talked to you about metal for half an hour as a companion.
Oh my God, I would love it.
As a companion piece.
And I'm sure like people that actually know a lot more than I do about this genre are like cringing listening to me talk about it.
I don't know, Joe. I feel like you've got some metal chops.
I mean, I also read this book like 18 years ago. Actually, I have my copy right here. If you're,
I started reading it today, and was chuckling to myself and I can say this because CC isn't on the show, when this passage where they talk about this band, what the hell? They were a '60s band.
Coven. Oh, Coven.
Yes, and so one of the tracks on their like big satanic album was literally like a recitation of some kind of black mass.
Yeah, it was
and
like the last.
The book is like, it is highly dangerous for anybody to listen to this if you don't have pre-knowledge of dark black magic or whatever. And I'm like, okay, bro, thanks for the warning.
It's funny
about that. That album.
I think I'll be okay. And then I looked it up on Spotify, and guess what?
That band is known for this song One Tin Soldier or One Brave Soldier,
yes.
Which was like a straight up, like it was on Freedom Rock that I had when I was in middle school. But like then like everything else they did was all like, black mass and Satan worship and stuff like that. Like it's pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's funny listening after. So I'm curious, Joe, because you're the closest to my age, and we talked about you graduated high school in '97 or so. So about 5 years after me. A lot of this stuff, because I've been reading the Lords of Chaos book too. At the beginning of it, talks a lot about the performance angle of the Satanism in these early metal albums, and they talk to a lot of the musicians and stuff. When you were coming into this stuff, did you buy into all the Satanism story behind these bands and things like that?
No, because again, like I was a little late to the game. Like, I mean, I remember growing up and hearing stories about how like Iron Maiden threw puppies into the audience and made it's murder and stuff. And, like,
yeah, go ahead.
But I mean, even that seemed like pretty far fetched. But then you hear stories about Ozzy like biting a head off a bat and like that.
But it's also a really important point though about early 90s being pre-internet. It's funny, Casey and I were just having this whole conversation pre-show about sort of dealing with the realities of like our children using the internet and like what that means. But like a myth like this, right? Or somebody with such a well meticulously kind of cultivated image, like it was, when the people don't believe this, but I was there, and let me tell you, there were people in 1998 who thought the Blair Witch Project was real. They were pretty dumb. Yeah. They were not smart people, but they existed. I had literal, real life Z's conversation with these people. It was easier to get away with something like that than, just generally, I feel like now we're so cynical about assuming everything is a put on or is fake or a work, sort of, to use wrestling terminology only Mark would understand. They're like, we just assume everything's horseshit now because what the internet has probably rightly taught us is that everything is horseshit. But the early 90s, I feel like were this much more innocent time in a weird way, where I could 100% see a kid like in wherever, like flyover country USA, somehow getting like a third-hand cassette tape of this and being like, oh, these guys like worship the devil. This is crazy. I'm gonna go burn a church.
Well,
now.
My point to that question, though, Joe, because I graduated in '92, and I probably heard about like Mayhem and all of their story probably like '94, '95. A friend of mine, the internet was, I don't even know if I had the internet at that point in my house. A friend of mine had read about them in a magazine, came and told me about it. And for me, being from small town Indiana and having nowhere to pull up this information on my fingertips, it's like, holy shit, these guys are evil as fuck. Mm-hmm. Why this movie blows my gourd.
Well, that's like, and we're kind of getting into actually discussing the movie now. Like, that's why I found this so interesting, is because I've read a lot and I've watched a lot of interviews, but it's always like these guys running around burning churches and these couple murders that happen. Like you never see the kind of goofy, stupid teenager side. So, reading this book, I'm like, well, yeah, these guys do really believe this stuff. And then there are some of them who do believe this stuff.
Oh, let me tell you about a little man named Vars.
Varg
Varg.
Rufinus.
Varg.
Count Grishlock, or however you say it.
Joe sent me down an anti-Semitic YouTube hole today that I'm pretty sure is going to ruin my recommendations forever.
These guys lead to all kinds of cool paths.
Oh God, I legit get terrified of liking any of these bands on Facebook because I'm like, well, what sort of hate group am I getting connected
Also,
with?
I figured we would just like talk about some of this real life stuff that I found fascinating, like before we get into the actual movie, so we can kind of just like put it aside. But like, so the story, because it's a real life story, it's been out. It's not really a spoiler, like if you've read about it all. But like, one of these band members kills another band member. So then Joe casually mentions to me today that the murdering band member is just out because apparently in Norway there's like there's a maximum sentence for anything.
Yeah, I don't. Everything I've read, I don't know like what the actual law is, but everything states that as he was sentenced to 21 years in prison, the maximum sentence you can get in Norway.
So he like served his time, and he's just out now, and he has what I now know is an incredibly racist YouTube channel. He doesn't like this movie. I found out that they straight up went to them to ask for the rights. They refused for the rights to any of the music. So that's something we can talk about, like with the kind of how they deal with the music portion of this. But just like 25 seconds into the first video I clicked on, he's complaining that they hired a Jewish actor to play him, and he says something to the effect of like, "You know how I feel about the Jewish people," and I was like, "I do now."
I was laughing my ass off because Joe sent us those links, and he's like, "Fair warning, he gets into anti-Semitic shit like 10 seconds in. He was not wrong."
Also, he keeps describing the movie and the book as "quote unquote" character murder, as in like murdering his character, and I'm literally at work just like losing my. I'm like,
literal murderer.
I'm like, you did literal murder. I watched it. I just saw it happen. Like to the idea that someone who's actually murdered somebody would be so flippant about the use of the word murder is insane.
Yeah, I mean, you go back even to the book, which came out in, I think, 98.
I just have so many questions about this whole thing.
Like most people that were, quote unquote, involved in the scene said that the book is bullshit. Like the way that they recount things is completely wrong. So
yeah, which is fascinating. I mean, I feel like the thing is, if you interview 20 people about the same event they all lived through, they're all going to have a different idea of what the truth is, right? And a lot of these guys also seem insanely self-important, which are usually the first people to deny anyone else's like events, recounting of events. I don't know. Yeah. I listened to Vark for 5 seconds and am pretty inclined to ignore his opinion on literally anything.
Yeah, that's a safe bet. Although you really should watch the one where he gives his advice on what type of woman you should be looking for.
Oh,
it's fascinating.
He used to do his love line.
Yeah.
I tried to listen to a little Mayhem myself. I did not get very far in it. But then I listened to Burzum, which is Varg's.
That's Varg's solo stuff, yeah.
And I liked it a lot better. But I didn't want to, and I hate to admit it. But,
now, is that you listen to
I was like, now this I could probably listen to, except like this is a crazy murderer, anti-Semitic.
Well, yeah, I mean, that kind of, man, it's weird. That super bothered me that I could just go to Spotify and listen to the music of a literal murderer. I mean, it bothers me that he's out, for starters. Like, that's fucking crazy. But also, like, his music is just there on Spotify. That's so weird to me.
That's what I find interesting, because Spotify has obviously banned a lot of, quote unquote hate groups. They famously, like R. Kelly, his stuff has been taken out of their rotation. But I think it's stuff like this that, like, most people don't even know about, that just kind of slides through the cracks. And it's
maybe it's right. Maybe it's the obscurity, so they don't look at it as like a PR issue to have it up there.
And also, his music isn't really touting this stuff, or at least not that you could ever understand. So it's hard to be like, well, these lyrics are saying this, so we should take him off. Like
Shelton, did you listen to like his original, like old school, like 90s solo music? Because he still makes music now, right?
Yeah, I think it was a newer album. But what I thought was kind of cool about it was it had like the heavy like chugga chugga guitars, but then it had like a synthesizer kind of sound, like these really like clean keys on top of it.
Yeah.
And it was almost like it was like a metal background with like electronic music in the front. I don't know. It was pretty cool.
Now, on
and
any
I'll never listen to it again.
on any given album, how many of the songs were about his distaste for the Jewish people?
I didn't make it to any of the lyrics. I think
Yeah.
this was an instrumental. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that was a rabbit hole I just kind of like wanted to peek in.
Yeah,
See what
it's
was
funny.
down there, and I didn't want to go too deep into it.
That's hilarious because I had the same.
I don't like it. And,
I had the same reaction because I was really intrigued by the movie, and so I was kind of picking Joe's brain to sort of like I actively goaded Joe into sending me down the rabbit hole, and then I did the same thing as Shelton. I peeked my head in and was like, "Nope, don't want any part of this," and then she's like retreated.
I would suggest Emperor, one of the other bands that was actually
Well, that's the one the guy killed the gay guy, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
so that
cool. So nothing, they're less controversial. Is that what you're saying?
Well, their early stuff, and the guy who committed the crime isn't on this album, but like their early stuff is considered pretty much up there with some of the Mayhem stuff, and it's a little more synthy at certain points, so you might be able to get into that.
You know, Joe, I think I'm just gonna stick with Halloween. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's fine too. That's totally fine.
Little Dragon Force.
You know, the Scorpions, they actually had some jams.
Yeah.
The Winds of Change.
Oh, dude, Winds of Change.
Took the
Listen,
Berlin Wall down.
Joe,
It
I
did.
know you rock the fuck out when Winds of Change comes on.
Oh, absolutely.
song
the,
is-
the Moscow Music Peace Festival. I watched the entire thing and had it on VHS.
That song is life changing, Joe.
Mm-hmm. Take me to the magic of the moment.
Speaking of, you know what is featured pretty heavily in this movie, Joe?
Mm.
Alcohol.
Yeah.
A lot of parties that looked very smelly. Very smelly.
A lot of parties with a lot of guys that looked a lot smellier than I was in high school, but
Oh.
we're still getting a lot more women than I was in high school.
This might rival Apostle for having the smelliest looking characters I've ever seen in a movie. And we can get more into that in a little bit here. But first off, Joe, please tell us what we are drinking tonight.
Beer guts.
Oh, never have I struggled with just picking one beer for a movie like I did with this one. Unfortunately, every Norwegian beer I have drank, I've also used on this show in the past, so I didn't feel right, doing a repeat. But I did pick a beer from some folks that I love all the way up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this is from Surly Brewing Company, and this beer is called Damien, and it is an American black ale, which I think fits pretty well with our black metal Satanist buddies there. So it borders on like a black IPA, so there's a good amount of hops in there. Surly, I've talked about them before and done a few of their beers. I'm a huge fan of everything that they do, and the stuff that they put out is usually pretty great. Like I said, it's a black IPA, so you get like that hoppiness, but you also get that roasted malt kind of balancing it out. And it's one of my favorite styles, and I really love it. Comes in at 6.5% alcohol, so it's a little bit up there, but nothing crazy. You can definitely drink these and still put on your corpse paint if you need to. Surlybrewing.com is their website, and they don't distribute super far out of the Midwest, but if you can find them, I definitely suggest you pick their stuff up, or if you can make a trip to the brewery, even better, because it's a blast, and they have one of the best that I've been to. So by all means, I recommend everything they do.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't put on corpse paint.
Too late.
Unless you're Joe on that Halloween and you were just living the dream. Just don't,
You know,
just don't do it.
the story behind that is literally we had been living in our house for like 3 months and just kind of became friends with our neighbors, but my sister was also living with us, and she had done makeup in college, so I'm like, I can't pass up this opportunity to actually do this on Halloween. So like literally we're walking me around with like some of our neighbors that we had met like 2 weeks ago, and they're like, oh, so this is cool, huh?
Oh, good times. All right, Joe. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Joe, did you are you familiar with this director of this movie, Jonas Åkerlund? So this Wikipedia tells me he was a member of the Swedish black metal band Bathory from 1983 to 1984.
Yeah, so and that kind of gives him the quote unquote street cred for directing this. He was in the band for a very short amount of time, and Bathory, to their credit, is really considered one of the influencers of this sort of second wave of black metal. But I guess in his mind, like, he kind of feels like he was a part of the genre and has a little more insider, information there. But I only knew him because he actually directed a Metallica video a couple years back, which actually has like a black metal band performing in like a bar, pretty much dressed up like the guys in Mayhem. So that's the only time I had heard of him.
Joe, did you know he also directed the video for The Prodigy's "Smack My Bitch Up"?
I did not know that, but
Oh,
And
shit.
He's also made Taylor Swift videos.
"Telephone" by Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga.
Well, he has a newer movie that is on Netflix now called Polar that has Mads Mikkelsen, and it's kind of a John Wicky actiony kind of thing.
Huh.
Haven't seen it yet, but
It's okay.
heard things.
I've seen the Polar Express. I assume this is some sort of
It's the sequel,
when
Yeah.
they get to the Polar.
or technically a
Express.
prequel. Yeah.
I get it.
All right, guys. It is time. Let us discuss the Lords of Chaos.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV. From the prime time, bitch. Main feature.
And we're back. Mr. John Shelton.
Yes, sir.
You didn't go to Duke, but that's okay. When
We can't all go to Duke.
when you are here, we like to think that you bring a workman-like attitude to the word of the day when Schnars is not here.
That's what I go for. The
Wait.
working man's Duke.
That's right. You know words, but they're like real words,
This one's not a real word.
Oh, cool.
Mm.
Jarngenflogen or something, was it? Right.
Close enough.
All right, John, please bring us the word of the day.
So the word of the day. This is technically a proper noun.
Oh boy, you're
I
gonna
don't
get
know if
called
this
out
is-
for this.
Oh boy.
I'm told I did that one time and I got chastised.
It's an interesting proper noun. It's a relevant proper noun. It is Euronymous, which is the name of the lead singer, the main character of this movie. All the guys in Mayhem have really cool metal names like Euronymous and Dead and Necro Butcher
Dead.
and
Hellhammer.
Count Gargamel or something like that. So Euronymous, it turns out this is it's derived from a demon from Greek mythology. Euronymos, it's a little misspelled, was the netherworld daemon of rotting corpses dwelling in the underworld,
Sweet.
which sounds pretty fucking metal to me.
It does.
Very much.
Yeah. It's described in some painting or something like that. But he guided people, or he was described by the guides as one of the daemons of Hades who eats off all the flesh of the corpses, leaving only their bones. In Homer's Odyssey, they don't mention him. But apparently in the painting, he is of a color between blue and black, like that of meat flies, whatever that is, showing his teeth and seated, and underneath him is spread a vulture skin.
Wow.
Also mentioned in the Satanic Bible. So that's Euronymous, which becomes Euronymous, which becomes the Rory Culkin in this movie.
Crazy. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Oh, thank you.
All right, guys. Lords of Chaos. Lords of Chaos is set in the early 90s Norway, land of Schnars' people. It's too bad he couldn't be here tonight. And it takes place, it basically focuses on this character, Euronymous, played by Rory Culkin, who, when we start the movie, they've already formed Mayhem, is that right? Mayhem seems to exist when the movie starts, I think. But it's just not, it's not known yet.
He's just starting, so I think they're just kind of hooking up. So yeah.
So we basically see the early days of the band through them becoming more well known, sort of making this Norwegian black metal scene kind of famous around the world in metal circles. We don't actually see a lot of that directly, oddly enough. It's more sort of background window dressing for this personal story which is playing out. Early on in the movie, he has a friend named Dead who turns out to basically be like a very depressed dude. And he eventually, kind of in the first act, kills himself. And Euronymous takes photos of it to basically use to kind of further the band's notoriety, so to speak. He then eventually falls in with this dude named Varg, who at first is kind of, they call him a poser, but he sort of ingratiates himself with them and starts trying to out-metal everybody else. And in doing so, kind of actually starts to eclipse Euronymous as sort of the most metal person, which begins to cause like tension in the group just as they're sort of blowing up. And then eventually it turns really sinister where Varg starts torching churches and starts pulling in other members. One of the members kills a guy, that sort of a gay man that he lures into a park for sex. And shit gets really dark from there, basically. And so you've got these competing narratives of the band simultaneously getting really big and imploding, all of these interpersonal relationships blowing up, and everybody's lives kind of crumbling around them, while also sort of being an interesting just kind of time capsule of not the music or the bands itself, I feel like, but the subculture, and sort of the lives these kids were leading. And it all leads up to a murder, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
But don't worry, it's a happy ending. The guy's not in jail, so there you go. But yeah, that is Lords of Chaos, based on the book written in the late '90s by the same name. And
Yes.
here we are tonight to discuss it. So, John Shelton, what do you think?
So I was probably the most down on this movie. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I thought it was okay. I think a lot of it was maybe just because of how unpleasant I found all the characters. I just didn't really like being with them. They were all kind of edgelordy, which is kind of the point of the movie. But I don't know. I found the movie, it was real kind of totally inconsistent. It was all over the place. Sometimes it was kind of satirical, and other times it was like a music biopic about, like, you know, this band and their heydays. Other times it was like a true crime movie. And I don't know. I just didn't really see what the point of it all was, other than just to, you know, to tell the story, which is, it's an interesting story. And I think, you know, that's, you know, it's got that going for it. It's a salacious story. It's, you know, it's tabloid, you know, kind of stuff that, you know, it gets into like murder and suicide and church burnings and all this stuff. But I didn't really, I don't know. I kind of came away from it kind of cold, I guess is how I'd say it.
Casey.
Excuse me. I really got drawn into this movie. I got drawn into the characters. I've got, like I talked about at the top of the show, I've got my own history with hearing the story about Mayhem and everything, and seeing the portrayal here on how you get to see more of their normal lives. I think, John, you had mentioned at one point them driving away in their modest and reliable Volvos, which really stood out to me. That stuff it was not at all how I had this whole thing pictured in my head. So seeing this coming from a different angle really blew my gourd. It got really dark. It got really violent. There's some brutal stuff here. I was really drawn into the story from beginning to end. I thought the acting was great, and I really enjoyed it.
Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the director or whoever wrote the script takes some pretty big liberties here. So having known the story, there was definitely a couple of things that stuck out to me. And like I said, like I've been looking forward to this for years, so I was pretty nervous, you know, when I went to watch it. Like for instance, they make Euronymous and Dead, you know, pretty much out to be like best buds, and from all accounts, like they really hated each other, to the point where like Dead wouldn't even sleep in the same house with him. So I thought that was kind of interesting that they kind of try to tug on your heartstrings that like my best buddy's dead, and Euronymous didn't have a girlfriend, at least not by anyone who was involved in the scene or anything as serious as they make it out here. So I think if you can separate yourself, if you know kind of the history of some of this, or if you read the book or read up on the story, I think you have to separate yourself from that, because at the end of the day, and the director's even admitted that, like, you know, he needs to make a movie that people want to watch. So he put in a girlfriend to kind of give it a little more heart and things like that. So I ended up enjoying this a decent amount. I'd say it pretty much met my expectations. I didn't think it was going to be this amazing biopic of like the black metal scene and, you know, how all these bands came to be. I was kind of expecting just a story of the murders, and that's pretty much what you get. If you know, it's debatable how true to life it really is, but I thought Culkin was really good in this. I thought he played the character pretty well. I thought they made him a lot more likable than he probably was in real life. You know, we kind of get hints of it when Varg is initially burning these churches, and Euronymous is trying to take credit for, say, like, yeah, I gave you the idea, so like we did this. You know, my understanding is like that was pretty much him like trying to take over everything. So they kind of downplay that, which I thought was kind of interesting, and I was a little disappointed in even, but overall I really enjoyed the movie and thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I had no real idea what to expect from this. I think I had some context on the real life story just literally from talking to Joe about it on GChat a
Mhm.
couple different times, because Joe's my source of knowledge on this stuff when I learned about it. Um, so I didn't really know what to expect. I was really drawn in by this movie. I feel like it's a little rough around the edges. There's a couple narrative choices that are a little strange, but what it does so well to me is like paint a picture of this subculture. And like I said, it doesn't really give you any insight on the music. It doesn't obsess over the players outside of this band. Like, you know, you're not going to really learn anything about the other bands or the scene as a whole, or like where it came from, but to me it's kind of a uh fascinating story of the way that the sort of how this subculture operated in a certain way, or like on a really micro level. You see the way that like when you have a group like this that is, you know, disenfranchised, they are, well, sometimes, I mean, some of them are literally just whatever, like they don't have a reason to be this way, but angry sort of, and then they find each other and they're isolated and they're siloed off together, and what you see is the way that their groupthink forms and escalates everything they're doing. And so that's what the movie is. It's this constant ratcheting up of the tension, like one-upsmanship of like who's more metal. But what happens is that eventually turns like very bad and deadly in a real world sense. What I also really appreciate about this movie is that it pokes fun at these guys, and that's where the tone can get a little weird, but I thought really worked for me in the sense of like, you can't watch this stuff. Again, it's like, it's really interesting watching something like this through a 2019 lens, because it's really silly, especially as an adult. Like, an adult with kids, you're like, these guys are fucking idiots. But you, the movie is constantly showing you how dangerous they really were, how dangerous it is when people like this are sort of stuck in this rhetoric and one-upping each other, but also it pokes fun at them, and I really enjoyed that stuff. Like, ultimately, and this kind of came in view for me more as we talked about the movie today, I think that the filmmakers actually have a lot of contempt for these guys, which when you read the real story, like, you should, because they're not only are they idiots, but in some cases they're like real world murderers. Um, you know, and that comes through in the script. Like, one of my favorite scenes was when sort of third act, when the newspaper guy comes to interview Varg, because Varg is just, at this point in the movie, Varg is basically a total maniac, and he thinks he needs to just like keep going and spread his message to the larger world. And so he calls a newspaper, and the guy's over and he's like, "So you tell me you're pagan and you're a Satanist. He's like, and also you have a Nazi flag on your wall. He's like, that seems like sort of a lot of different ideology. And then they're him and the photographer like leaving the interview, and then the photographer's like, that guy was an idiot. And I'm just like, those little moments of weird levity I actually really enjoyed. But at the same time, what I think is really riveting about the movie is it's like this constantly ratcheted up tension, because you basically know where it's going. You know it's going to go too far. So I think Culkin's fantastic. Like, I loved him in this. I think he overcomes what are, to me, some like flaws in the character writing for his character. But I thought he was so good at like I could smell him. Like, generally what feels so authentic about this movie is like the visual, like the visual and the set dressing touches, and like when they're this house that they live in the beginning is just vile and disgusting, and like then when he's got the record store later, you can literally like smell the secondhand smoke and BO that place must have smelled like. I mean, that stuff is so visceral and so well done. I feel like there was such an attention to detail from that stuff. If I have a complaint, I think it's just sort of talking about some of the stuff John and Joe mentioned. Like, they really ham-fist in basically a Hollywood character redemption arc into this movie that I don't think has any business in it. I think the really ballsy thing to do would have just been to present this movie full of unlikable people as is. Like, you can do that, Shelton. You know what I mean? Like, it is possible to make a movie entirely about unlikable people and just take it to a really dark place. So, especially during the finale, this stuff with Culkin where they're trying to make you relate to him feels so bizarre and out of place, especially like in 2019.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what, knowing the story, I kind of liked about this movie so much, was that you read the articles and like you watch interviews and stuff, and you don't really get that sort of human side, isn't really the term you should use for it, but like the idiotic teenager side of it, right? Because you read the story and it's about this one guy that kills a gay guy in a park. It's about this other guy that killed his other band member and was burning down churches. Like, that's all super serious, like fucking scary stuff. But then you watch the movie and you kind of get the, oh yeah, these are just dumb kids who got way too caught up in the hype of things, and we're trying to pretty much have a pissing contest and see who could do the more extreme thing. And one guy had a screw loose and went too far with it, and everybody else kind of latched onto him. Like, that was the interesting thing to me about watching this story.
Yeah, and one thing that I think they did really well is the casting, because everybody in this movie, all the guys in this movie look like they're about 17 years old. They're not like scary looking dudes. They look like dirtbag teenagers. And I think that that really like helps kind of deflate some of the the myth that you get from listening to the music and reading in a magazine, like, oh, this guy like took a picture of his bandmate after he was dead, and then this other guy killed him, and they burned down churches, and that sounds like, holy shit, these are like some scary, serious guys.
Yeah, like these guys never smiled a day in their life. Like, that's what you get from the story.
Yeah,
and I
but
think
then you see them, and they're just like dirtbag teenagers, like trying to like edgelord each other out.
And oh my god, it's so edgelordy. And I think what they do really, the whole movie, is playing around with like their own myth making versus the reality, as far as like the reality is that's presented in this movie, right? And the movie is obsessed with this idea of sort of metal purity, which I think is kind of the ultimate metal thing, Joe, as we were talking about. But like, in this sense, it's this purity to this death aesthetic and not caring, literally.
True Norwegian black metal.
Yeah.
Like, and more than any other subgenre of metal, I want to say black metal is guilty of that. Like, and it's you kind of see it at its roots here.
I would say any kind of like music, any kind of music scene or whatever that has a bunch of like young dudes gets all obsessed with purity and selling out. I don't know much about metal, but like I was in a punk scene, and I know there were some bands that were like cool, and then like all of a sudden, like, oh, you suck if you listen to them. They came out with a new album. They're on a major thing.
I was
or rap is the same way. It's all about like keeping it real, and like I think any kind of music that I think that's just something that's natural to like young guys who are looking for their identity and trying to like one up each other constantly.
And the movie is obsessed in a really fascinating way with showing sort of the rituals, in the sense of like they're basically like performing for each other, right? Like Varg, the first time we meet Varg, he's got a scorpion's patch on his jacket, and they call him a poser. And he quickly learns that these are the things this is how I have to dress, this is how I have to look and act in order to get in with these guys. And then Rory Culkin, like this Euronymous character, who is kind of painted as the ringleader, or at least the guy who gets shit started. He's like the salesman. He sort of like creates this image and sells this black metal thing, but what keeps happening to him is like he attracts people. Like the movie is constantly showing you sort of the cracks in his facade of doubt and like not fully believing in this thing. But what happens is he keeps attracting these people who are true believers, right? Like literally this stuff with like this death dude in the beginning, or Dead, or whatever the hell the guy's name was, like
Dead, yeah.
so disturbing. Like the first 20
Yeah.
minutes of this movie are just insanely disturbing. Like I was very uncomfortable during all this stuff, right? But like he keeps running into dudes who really buy into this lifestyle and then sort of call his bluff, so to speak.
Well, it all kind of escalated from that one suicide, because Dead, the way he committed suicide was, it was in, I guess, the house that they shared. He shot himself with a shotgun, blood everywhere. And that kind of like set off this whole chain of events where, I probably, or at least in the movie, the way it's presented, like in the moment, Euronymous decides, hey, I'm going to take pictures. This will be super metal. And maybe not. He takes pieces of the skull and makes necklaces out of it. And then from there, like that's just such that's a step beyond. Like before that, they were just talking about evil and metal and everything, and that made it real. And then once it like kind of crossed over into the real, then it became a pissing contest between him and Varg over or actually it was really just Varg like pushing him, because Varg was he seems like he's genuinely a psychopath or sociopath or something.
Yeah.
Right.
And kind of it was when image comes up against reality, and
it's funny you
defeat each
mentioned
other.
that scene where Varg first goes into the record store and he's wearing the Scorpion's patch, and they kind of make fun of him for it, and they take it off. In those videos that we were watching, Varg makes a point that he never listened to the Scorpions and he never liked them, like, which is probably true, and the scene in there is bullshit, but like the fact that he has to point that out in a video pretty much proves the point that they're trying to make with his character.
Well, I mean, you listen to him and he is so self-important sounding. I'm like, forget about the details, right? Because all these movies fudge those details like this. And to be fair, nowhere in Lords of Cast is it like, well, this is based on a true story. I feel like they sort of own the kind of
they even say at the beginning, this is
fictional-
based on truth and lies.
fictional nature of it, right? But like you listen to that Varg dude in real life for 5 minutes and you're like, oh my God, they nailed his self-importance so well.
Yeah.
Well, and I was really struck by how they painted him out to kind of be a poser, to use the scene name, because like Shelton was saying, these exist in all the different music scenes and everything, but they really kind of pointed it out there when I feel a lot of the scenes start calling each other, the kids start calling each other that, not knowing what it means, whereas they really kind of painted Varg to be a poser that come in and wanted to adopt the look and everything to be accepted.
The other point that the movie really hits to that idea is that like everyone in this movie is a poser. Everyone is trying to live up to this basically fictional idea of metal purity, and no one wants to, really at the end of the day, they're all just looking to belong somewhere. But depending on the sort of strength of everyone's personality, certain people sort of emerge as leaders that egg the other ones on. Like really the only one in the movie that I feel like truly buys into, and it's just the way it's presented in the movie, but this Varg dude seems like the only one who is really buying into the life.
Yeah.
Like if you look at the Dead dude, like he buys into it, but he's so depressed that it's really just, he just doesn't give a shit about anything. And the way it's presented.
It's more depression and a mental illness. And for him, the thing that, like, when I was talking about having this story built up behind Mayhem, from when I heard it, and not able to, vet any of it, and then seeing what they present here, if it's true or not, I don't know. But like with Euronymous, he's maybe the biggest poser of them all, because they start out the movie and you see that he likes his sister, and they've got all these family pictures in his house with him and his parents, and they're matching sweaters and shit like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Whereas,
It's really interesting the way that they kind of weave in that angle, though, because like the movie has this sort of weird dreamlike quality to it, where they skip over or they gloss over, or the actual big moments, or I don't know, some of this background stuff is kind of like background noise. Like the big events in the band's history is background noise. This thing with Varg's family is sort of like a weird dreamlike background thing. And then they jump around to really what the movie looks at are just these like important personal interactions. Does that make sense? Like it's not, I don't know, it's a weirdly non-linear movie in some ways, even though I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, that was that's kind of touches on one of my problems with the movie, is that it never really gets into why they're attracted to this. What is it? You don't see anything of their home. I don't even think. Do you even see Euronymous' parents, or do you just like kind of hear them off screen?
No, you do. You do.
you see him
You
a couple
do?
times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember she made spaghetti bolognese for him one time. And he was
Yes.
really happy.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Um,
delicious.
Yeah,
But
it's
what?
good stuff.
But couldn't you argue that's kind of the point, though? Because there was that whole scene with Dead before he killed himself, where the phone's ringing and the answering machine picks up, and you hear his dad in the background saying, "Hey, we just got the letter. You got accepted to college."
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a choice. I mean, and it also like goes out of its way to to point out that that Euronymous opens his record store and puts out his record with his parents' money, and that Varg, Varg, he can't afford to put out his album, and Varg asks his dad for money. It goes out of its way to kind of point that stuff out, but it never really shows why they're attracted to this. What makes them compelled to make this kind of music, and then it never gets into the stuff they make. Like, what did they make, and like what caused them to make it?
Yeah,
It's
I
just
mean, I
kind
guess
of like that in between.
I definitely see your point there, and like from knowing a little more on the story, like there is this whole thread of like they're burning down churches because they're pissed off at the Catholic Church in Norway, and like they think it's taking away from like the true roots of like Odin and whatever the fuck else went on there with Vikings. Like, but you're right, like they don't really touch on that, with the exception of like a couple back and forth rants between Varg and Euronymous about how they effing hate the church because of this. Like, it is an interesting, like, I don't know why they
I
wouldn't
also
at
think,
least explore
though,
that a little bit.
I think that going down that rabbit hole, though, isn't necessary, because what the movie is really, I think, presenting is just a picture of like Western white male anger, like, and the way that plays out is kind of can be always the same on some level
Sure.
without like the details, if that makes sense, right? Like they're all angry, like who fucking knows why? I mean that's what's if anything, what I would have liked them to lean into more is like the contrast between this kind of like old world bucolic Scandinavian setting with, and then like this scene sort of festering in the middle of it, right? Like, but in some ways that anger to me seemed that like sort of I don't know, like adolescent anger seemed so universal that I almost felt like to wallow in the details of why they believe those things, to me takes away from the real thing, which is just adolescent anger. And like it just like it's more about like what does it get, it can be focused into anything, and it's
Or it almost validates it, I guess, and to some extent.
but what always happens, right, is that then these people find each other and they egg each other on, and that anger can, like, when you then add in this mental illness and these really unstable people into the equation, like how things can like get out of control. Like I think it's a really conscious choice to not go into that stuff, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it is. I kept thinking while watching this, like, this easily could have been set in Florida in the late '90s with a bunch of guys listening to Limp Bizkit, or
Yeah, it's
this-
mo-
Yeah.
I wish
Or
that
right
they
now
had
with 4chan and and
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's
red
definitely
pill
a
incel
there's
culture.
absolutely a very timely aspect to that part of it.
sure.
I wish that this is like a bugaboo of mine, but I hate when I mean, even though I've been complaining a lot about subtitles lately, Joe, I feel like for something like this, if not subtitles, like I really would have preferred Norwegian actors with accents.
Mhm.
Because I don't know if you ever heard like a Norwegian person speak English, but that accent is amazing.
It's a
But
lot
also
of fun. Yeah.
like Shelton mentioned over email, it's like they sort of pay lip service to being in Norway in the beginning of the movie, but then that flavor is not really present. Whereas I actually think that it should have been a bigger part of this.
Yeah.
The sort of whatever the cultural stew was that these guys were operating on the edges of could have brought a little more color to it, I guess.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I mean the whole thing happens because of like how they feel Norway is trending. So
And some of
it
them
is
like
interesting that they steer away from that.
and some of them sort of seem to have weird half British accents. Like listen, I cannot sit through The Hunt for Red October. I think that is horseshit. I know I've complained about that in the show before, but it's just like a weird it's a weird thing, man. Like I just need it. I need the flavor, you know? Like I can't
It's about time somebody took a stand against that movie.
it could be literally anywhere where this movie takes place, and that's kind of that part of it's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Now that we
Although they
talked
do
about it, and
their
like
sets
Joe's mentioned that though, that you can place this in any kind of scene or movement in Florida, Limp Bizkit, whatever. It's really kind of brings to light some of the points that John was making. But I could see at the same time that's a whole different movie to get into the scenes and the political movements other than just this one band.
I do think they do a great job with the churches. I don't know how, like, if they just had to. I mean, in order to burn them down, I guess I mean, they were just little wooden things. I guess they must have just recreated some of them.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
There's one in Epcot if you want to go.
I really love the cinematography with the church burning and the kind of symbolism of just the like the destructive hate and chaos. I feel like the movie's really chaotic and disorganized, and I feel like that's kind of analogous to the way they were, just sort
Mm.
of aimless and angry and destructive. And so the movie kind of has this chaotic feeling that I think lends to that.
I think it's interesting though because you keep talking about how they're angry and chaotic and things like that, and the way they painted them in this movie. I don't know that like Euronymous was that angry and pissed off. He was more about trying to make a name for himself and building a scene and stuff and taking advantage of that, which I think is probably part of their point. Whereas Varg was angry like that, but I don't know that all of them are, and some of them were just followers going along with whatever Varg and Euronymous were doing, which paints an interesting picture.
I mean, I think it kind of goes back to what Eric was saying about not really needing to kind of hound on why they were doing these things, because it kind of takes away that these were just bored
They're just
middle class kids who had
They're-
nothing to really be angry about, so they had to find something, and they
they're
had too much
just
time on their hands.
they're just friggin' idiots, and I feel like to pay
Yeah.
too much lip service to it is a weird rabbit hole to go down. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean that's.
I mean,
kinda-
that's why it like the Limp Bizkit thing kept touching on me, is because like I just remember the joke back then was like, why are these suburban white kids so angry? Like, what are you angry about? You have
Listen,
nothing to be mad about.
the thing is, Joe, I've been there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so was I. So I mean, obviously I can't relate to like the stuff these guys were doing, but I get the idea of being kind of swept up in, you know, what these musicians that you like are doing and like the whole aura around it.
Yeah.
Like I can relate to it.
Like, do you remember how angry I was when we started this show like 11 years ago?
Yeah.
Now rewind 10 years back from that and imagine how angry I was when I was like 16.
You know what's weird is I've mellowed out a lot since I started listening to this music.
Ironically, I used to burn down churches all the time. Now I'm only like once a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I discovered there was other people doing it, and I'm like, oh. these guys are-
Do you think it would have helped with this movie to see more of like the rest of Norwegian culture's reaction to them and what they're doing as well? You don't
Yeah.
really get that in this movie.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the movie makes a really a really distinct choice to focus solely on these small interpersonal things with these guys. Like it makes a really conscious choice not to show that stuff, and it's interesting. I don't know.
I guess that kind of gives it, you know, more weight to their stupid little like arguments and
Drama.
fights, because it
Yeah.
means everything to them and the rest of the world doesn't give a shit.
Right.
But
Maybe I mean maybe that's
I
the
do
point.
kind of wish, because the one time that the outside world comes in is when they talk to that reporter. And the reporter walks out of there talking to the photographer like, what a fucking idiot. And like, the police come and arrest him the next day because he basically, he sets up this whole like photo shoot kind of set with he gets his swastika just right, and his goat head or whatever.
That was the
It
best
does
because
this really,
he's like, you can't see my face, right? And they're like, oh yeah, no, and it's just like you can totally see half his face.
yeah, it's like dumbass.
Well, this whole thing was like he had called these guys and told them like, I'm going to tell you the story about what these people went and did, and then within like 2 minutes, he's like, when we went and burned the church, like, oh shit, and then
Yeah,
he just goes with it.
Of course, Varg wouldn't like this movie because it makes them look like just the biggest idiots ever.
Well, yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh,
that's
for
the other
sure,
thing.
yeah.
But that is like an interesting that part of it was really a surprise to me because while I wasn't that familiar with the story, like I did understand that these guys sort of had built up their own myth back in the day, and like the movie is just very interested in breaking that down at every turn. It just wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. I was kind of a relief actually that it wasn't sort of glorifying it.
Yeah, I was surprised. Like watching the movie, because I knew the broad strokes of the story, but I didn't really know like what people thought about Mayhem, and I wasn't sure if it was a
Yeah.
band that people actually liked or if it's like, something I would know is like G.G. Allen, who like is kind of the similar type guy, but nobody really likes his music. Everybody just kind of accepts like he was a shitty musician, but like he did a bunch of crazy shit. And I was wondering like which of those it was, and I was really surprised afterwards to see that like this is on the list of every like black metal like top 10 albums. Like the album that they recorded in the movie is kind of a legendary album that people really really love. Because from the movie it makes them look like complete idiots, and I would think if you're a fan of this band, you'd probably hate this movie
Maybe
because
potentially,
it
yeah.
really makes them look like jackasses.
At least if you take it seriously.
Yeah, which I think at this point, not many people do. I could see if this movie came out like 2 years after the murders took place, or like,
Yeah.
the fans being like, "What the fuck are you doing? You're making our favorite band look like idiots." Now, I think there's just been so much swirl around it, and like anyone who knows the band kind of knows the story, so it's a little more removed.
Well, yeah.
And most of the fans of this band are going to be in their 30s or 40s and not angry teenagers who are going to be like, "Oh yeah, they were kind of idiots." But,
right.
Yeah.
You would
is it-
hope like
fair
you would hope at a point in their life where they can maybe laugh at it a little and take it a little less seriously.
Exactly.
Or paint their faces up on Halloween and run around with their kids trick or treating.
Yeah. Joe, can I tell you what in a scene in a movie just full of disgusting scenes that triggered my gag reflex? Can I tell you the one that almost put me over the edge?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was when he has sex with a girl with full face paint on, and it's all mashed over his face, and she's like kissing him, and I was like, I am going to vomit.
See, that was actually that whole thing, and I'm curious to do some digging on like how accurate that is. Like, I had never heard or read anything about like Varg being a ladies' man while all this stuff was going on. So I'm curious if that was just added for the
Effect.
story, or if that's like a real thing.
Yeah, I could see it being added to the story to build up the character that they were portraying Varg as in the movie.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, it was gross.
Very much so.
That party, the party scene too, where everyone's
yeah.
just drinking and vomiting and like tossing around pig heads or whatever the fuck it. Like that whole party scene was like,
Yeah.
Too
and
much.
again, like super depressing on my part because these guys were disgusting and getting women in high school. And meanwhile, I showered daily still.
Should have started a band, Joe.
Couldn't
Yeah.
get a fucking date.
were you ever in a band, Joe? Maybe you should have been. Maybe John's right.
Oh, I had a band. We were a two-man piece. We were called the Frothy Bunions, and we had paper mache toes that we put on our head.
And
I
that
hope
didn't get
that's
you
true.
chicks, huh?
That's gotta be. Is that a reference to something or is that real?
No, that's 100% real.
What? Do you have pictures of this?
I don't know.
Upload the music, please.
I don't know
Man.
if I have pictures
Man,
of
it's
the
been
the toes.
years. It's been years since I've heard a new Joe tidbit that good.
Me and my buddy Eric he was like my best friend that lived down the street. We would we had a band that we obviously never like played anywhere. Although we changed our name to Mayhem later on down the line, and we did play my birthday party one year, so that was the thing.
Can we get this music on Spotify? If Varg,
No, God, no.
if-
I think it's
listen,
probably on tape somewhere.
if
but...
Varg's music is up there, you guys should be up there too. Frothy Bunyan deserves a page too.
Frothy Bunions, yeah.
Amazing. Do you want to send me that corpse paint picture, Joe, so I can put it up in the video here in the second half of the show?
Oh yeah, sure. You know what? It's actually on our Instagram right now.
Delightful. All right, guys. Would you recommend Lords of Chaos? Casey,
Definitely.
Shelton.
I'd give it midway. It's a solid C+ movie for me. So if you're into metal, yeah. If not, there's no need to seek it out.
Joe.
Yeah, I'd say definitely worth a watch.
I'm gonna say definitely, and I'm not into metal, so I think this movie has legs potentially beyond that audience as well. All right, guys.
Or maybe you're into metal.
And no,
No.
you should have seen my face when I was listening to it. I was like bracing myself. All right, guys. Lords of Chaos. It's gonna do it. Let's take a quick break and do some fan mail.
Last year, you were terrified by House. Now there's an all-new House. With brand new owners.
Is she a virgin? Because I've never seen one before.
We got a little problem in the other room. Better come have a look.
And the place is really coming to life.
Thanks, Charlie.
House 2, the second story.
I've seen enough tragedy and disaster to make you want to upchuck in your shorts.
Rated PG-13. Starts Friday, July 10th at a theater near you.
Hey, I'm Tom Atkins. Thrill Me. You're listening to Bloody Good Horror.
Send your emails to info@bloodygoodhorror.com or hit us up on Twitter @BGHorror with the hashtag AskBGH. And don't forget to pick up back episodes of the show at podcast.bloodygoodhorror.com.
We're back. info@bloodygoodhorror.com. Casey, I know Mayhem is on Spotify. That's how I listened to it today.
I had no idea.
The whole
but-
so is Varg. Fucking Varg is on Spotify.
Oh, they're all on there.
Yeah. Him and his...
I honestly had no idea they had that many albums. I thought they had like one.
Well, it's not. Joe was telling me about it today. It's like just the bass player from the original band, right, Joe?
Yeah. What's his name? Hellhammer or whatever. He's still touring with the band.
Now,
I mean,
is he the one from the movie that basically is shown in every scene to be like, what is wrong with you guys? I just want to play music.
No, that was the one that quit.
So he did. Yeah, that's the same guy actually. He quit pretty much right before they made this Die Mysterious Dame. I don't know how to say it, but like that was like their big album and is kind of cited as like a huge influence on the movement in general. He quit right before that, and then Varg played on the album, and then pretty much came back after. So it's pretty much like if one of the Beatles had quit for the White Album and then came back after.
Huh. Interesting. Okay.
So yeah.
Do they ever tour? Like, would you go see these guys?
Yeah, they actually toured last year. I actually contemplated it, but it's kind of, it's not really the band anymore. It's almost like seeing a cover band.
Yeah. Who could tell? Not me.
Yeah.
info@bloodygoodhorror.com is the email address. First up, our buddy Dave. Dave says, Joe, weeks later, we are still getting email about our show on the Lawnmower Man. I know this is a few weeks removed from the episode, but I wanted to just point out that the irony in the Lawnmower Man being an adaptation. You guys pointed out how it has nothing to do with the short story, but what I think is even more insane, which I was waiting for Cece to point out, was that this was basically a modernized adaptation of the story Flowers for Algernon, just with a horror twist. So rather than adapt the Stephen King short, they instead used another story to adapt, yet they still kept the King title and initially even his name. Just bizarre. Anyways, this was fun to hear you guys revisit. I actually saw this in the theater as a kid because my dad was a big King fan, and I can remember how crazy futuristic all the computer technology seemed at the time. I think I even enjoyed it but also remember even 10 or 11-year-old me thinking the fact that this mentally challenged man was being seduced by the neighborhood cougars was a strange choice. I also vividly remember Pierce Brosnan's loosely buttoned shirts. That's from Dave.
Who could forget that?
Yeah, once you see it, there's no going back. info@bloodygoodhorror.com. Joe, we're also on Twitter.
We are. We use 2 different hashtags every week. First one, if you're listening to an old episode and something tickles your fancy, we use the hashtag BGH Classics. We got 2 here from our good friend Skizbot. First one says, for a nominal fee, folks, this is a fun new offer. We will actually point out the plot holes in your life and ruin that for you too. His name is Andy. And that is Eric introducing Andy on show 217, The Dark Knight Rises.
Nice.
And then one more.
I'm happy to point out plot holes in people's lives if they
want. One more says, Joe's a big dude, especially now that he lives in Chicago and is eating Mike Ditka's meat. Episode 225, Sinister. And that was Eric.
Sounds like
and then sounds like a thing you'd say. We also use the hashtag AskBGH, and that's every week. You can chime in with some questions. I got to make sure that I'm going back to the right one. I think this is the first from our friend at SwimFan314. He asks, what are the chances of getting a podcast of Joe narrating / reviewing Eric watching horny TV shows?
What were you going to ask? You were asking me about some show. I can't remember what it was. Yeah, we were talking about... Oh, no, we were talking about Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper at the Oscars.
Oh, yeah, that was curious. And I also, we forgot to talk about our new segment on the show that we're calling Does Eric Think It's Sexy?
Yeah.
And
this movie? No.
Yeah.
No.
So we actually posted up a poll on Instagram, and 70% of our followers thought you would think it is sexy.
In fact, it's gonna be a little while before I think I find anything sexy. Like, I'm gonna need a reverse recovery time for this movie. Joe, real quick though, can we look at my top 10 list?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think I have that in front of me.
So we'll need to get
right now. There's only one thing on there.
Yeah,
so.
We'll need to get a ruling from Schnars. We believe this will count as a 2019 release. But I'm gonna go bold here, John. I'm gonna say as of right now, this is my #1 movie of 2019.
Oh, bumping down Happy Death Day 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly confident that it will because it was released in 2018, but just at like a couple film festivals, so the chances of us actually being able to see it were slim to none. So, all right, perfect. I'm very happy to hear that. Next up from at Dangerous R Us, he or she says, why doesn't Eric do the synopsis more? The Suspiria episode was pretty damn amazing.
Huh, thank you. Well, whenever I do it, Joe, I do think to myself, God, this is so much better than when Schnars does it.
And it's definitely more compact for pretty much a task that you could complete by reading the IMDb paragraph.
My biggest problem is like just memory recall. Like I tend to get hung up sometimes and my brain just starts skipping and then I'm like, then I got to call on Schnars to help me anyway and it totally defeats the purpose. But I think I did all right the last couple of weeks.
Takes the reign. He's the Euronymous to your Varg.
That's right. Oh, I'm Varg? Weird. Okay.
Wow.
I mean,
I get it.
Next up from at DR. Well, you're the one actually doing the work, and he's the one trying to take credit for it.
Sure.
In the church burning world of words and synopsizing. Next up from at DRXP. Can you get Jason on the show more often? The tension between him and Eric in the Glass episode was brilliant.
I mean, listen, this movie's terrible, but I love it anyway. It was not a counterpoint I was prepared to deal with. So
Yeah.
Actually, I was laughing today. I tagged Joe on this thing on Twitter. The new editor of Fangoria just tweeted like, just sitting here thinking about that scene in Glass where, what's the actor's name? James McAvoy, where James McAvoy just stands on the lawn just saying "rar" over and over.
Like 20, 30 minutes straight.
Yeah.
A few more here from at Caesar Lesvoid. I'm probably saying that wrong. The subject matter of this movie is so far outside my wheelhouse. I have 0 questions, but I still want to say hello. Hello, BGH.
Hello.
I love you.
Hello.
Sometimes it's good to get outside your wheelhouse, Joe. Learn about new things you didn't know about before.
Absolutely. We didn't really talk about like how brutal the murder scenes were in this. which I was really surprised at, like how far they went with those.
Some of the most visceral stabbing since Blackcoat's Daughter. Like, this is an early contender for best stabbing of the year.
Sure. Yeah.
There's something about movie stabbing. Like, a lot of movies have a tendency to cut away, not necessarily cut away, but to kind of change angles or not to show you the actor, just use weird angles. Whereas this is, it's done in a very clinical way, which is what makes it so disturbing. Like, especially the scene where the guy kills the guy in the woods. Because there's a weird thing in that scene where he wants to know what it's like to stab somebody, and they show him just kind of like taking it in is the only way to describe it. Like, he just wants to see what it's like, and so he just keeps stabbing him, and just basically a wide shot, just trained on it, and it's like, it's real messed up.
Yeah.
The whole scene with Dead and his suicide was just god awful to watch.
It's tough to watch. Just for your own personal knowledge, Eric, that guy Faust, the one who kills the guy in the park, he is very much out of jail as well.
Does he have his own racist YouTube channel?
I don't think so. He's been a little touring? More. He has tried to. He's kind of popped up in a few bands, but nothing that's really been that well known.
Just insane. Like, what I would really want to know is, like, have any of these people ever shown, like, remorse for any of this stuff?
He 100% did not. Like, he even gave interviews where he's like, I feel no pity for what I did. Like, I don't know, that could be different now, but at the time, that was his thing. And even, like, there's, I think it's, I forget what documentary it is, but they kind of go over this. And there's people in there who are like, what's important is that he killed the guy, and that's you know what we were going for. Like, it's
right.
There's still folks that feel like this is an actual movement. Like, you know, teach their own.
Crazy town.
Cool.
Yeah, another one from DRXP. Joe, what is your opinion on people calling Deaf Haven hipster black metal?
Shots fired. I don't know what that band is.
I think I've actually sent you Deaf Haven before, because we talked about it before and you were asking. I mean, yeah, it's kind of what I was talking about. Like, black metal, I mean, metal in general, but black metal for sure has this whole, like, is it true Norwegian black metal, or is it true metal? Where, you know, and Deaf Haven is kind of do something a little outside of what traditional black metal did, and, you know, they've gotten popular, so obviously they're being called hipsters or whatever. I think, luckily, I'm 41 and past the age where I give a shit if some, you know, 24-year-old thinks a band are hipsters or not. Like, if I like it, I like it. If not,
I just can't differentiate between any of it, literally. And I just hear it, and it's immediately upsetting, and then I turn it off. You know what I do love, Joe? I'm sure you saw me. I'm sure you saw me listen to this last week. I love me some baby metal.
Yeah.
Shit is great.
Where's that biopic?
Oh my god.
I've got to imagine it's coming.
You know, they've gone through like many members.
So good.
Well, it was like a year ago where one of them didn't show up at the concert, and like it was this whole swirl around, like, was she kicked out? Like, did something happen? What's going on?
Fascinating.
It is. One from Seattle Screams. She says, is there any true event, killer, or crime that hasn't had a movie made about it that should, or one that has but none? Or one that has but did not do it justice.
I don't know.
That's a widespread question.
You know what? You know what I recommend, though. It's kind of different from this, but the god damn it, this is what I'm talking about, memory. The West Memphis 3, the trilogy of documentaries that Joe Berlinger did.
Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. Yeah, it was the first one. Just really fascinating stuff.
Next up from Skizby says, what's the most true Norwegian black metal thing you've ever done? Come on, we won't tell.
Oh, I've got one. I forgot to mention this. While I was watching the movie, I put together a chair from IKEA. No lie. It's a nice poang.
I mean,
that's Norwegian as fuck.
We definitely got into some like vandalism back in the day.
Yeah, sure.
Like, none of it as extreme as this, believe me. But
yeah, we definitely burned stuff in the woods.
Yeah.
You know, it was old like wrestling action figures, but it wasn't.
You ever
I've been to a number of parties that smelled like the party in this movie looked like.
Oh, I know. Unfortunately, you ever throw a mattress in a fire, Joe? That's one of the coolest things ever.
Dear God, no.
Because the mattress material basically lights up instantly, and then all you have is like the burning frame, and just like, and it's just red like coils. It's really cool.
That sounds metal.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Last time Schnars was out here in Chicago, we did burn down a church.
Oh, okay.
Completely
Cool.
forgot about that.
Yeah.
Slipped
Yeah,
your mind.
that makes sense.
And then he murdered me. Next up from @Burninator Ben. So Mayhem contributed to the quote unquote satanic panic of the early 90s. And oh Jesus, I don't know if I want to get into this. And Columbine was blamed on Marilyn Manson. Even Guar was on the shock rock episode of Jerry Springer. What would a band have to do today to cause similar parental outrage, do you think?
I mean, we're all just so desensitized. We're all quick to call horseshit on bands. You know, I don't know. It's a like, I feel like with every moral panic that happens, the bar gets pushed. Like there was definitely a pretty big moral panic with like Eminem at the time, just because of the lyrical content, even though it was kind of so silly at the time.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I mean, I've got to mention there's still bands out there that like parents are scared of and are saying you shouldn't go see.
There's also less. I mean, I think there's less monoculture. I mean, monoculture doesn't exist anymore, right? And so the days when a single band could get as much exposure by causing controversy are much lower. Like, you're also assuming now that a parent has any fucking idea what their kid is listening to. Whereas back in the day, if their kid's got MTV on and you walk by the room and there's some crazy shit on, you're like, what the hell is that? You know what I mean? Like now, do parents even know? They're just on YouTube and just watching.
Or you had to buy like a physical CD or tape, whereas now like you can just.
The parents would have to buy it for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
a couple more here from Mike Snunion.
I remember my mom. Oh, what? Buying this like my brother like in the 80s was way into hair metal. What is this band here? Unlawful Carnal Knowledge was the name of the CD.
Oh, Van Halen.
Yes. Yeah, I remember my mom not wanting to buy that because of the name for my brother.
I get that.
Hilarious.
I had to fight my parents to go see 10,000 Maniacs when I was a kid because just from the name they thought it was some punk band. I'm like, no, it's super lame. Like, come on.
Yeah.
I remember my mom had to buy me my first Guar album, and she was worried about the parental advisory, and we assured her it's just because of this one song called Pussy Planet, which was the last song. And it was literally the one song on the album that wasn't like completely foul.
Joe, this might surprise you, but my first full-length cassette tape was the Black Album by Metallica. Like 5th grade. And to this day, I know all the words to that because I listened to it nonstop.
It's a good album. Yeah. Next up from Mike Snunion. What would your black metal band name be?
Oh man, what was that name again?
Wait, which one?
The fucking Bunions or something?
Oh, Frosty Bunions.
Bunions.
Yeah, I don't know. I would need some time to think about this.
Can't beat that.
I'm gonna take a tip from Shelton in the chat earlier when we were posting Joe's corpse paint pictures and go with Crunchwrap.
Pretty metal.
That's not a bad one, yeah. All right, 2 more here. Frank V1313, and I'm not sure anyone other than me is going to have an opinion, but Mayhem or Dark Throne?
Sure.
Dark Throne all the way.
Yeah, I would go Mayhem.
What is
Throne?
What is Dark Throne, Joe?
How many people did they kill?
None, but it's interesting. I'm not sure if the guy's what's his name? Furnace. I don't know how to say it, but Eric, did you ever watch that Until the Light Takes Us?
The names on these people. I don't know. I definitely watched a documentary on this stuff once. I do not remember the name of it.
I think it's probably that one I remember sending you. Like, he's the one that kind of is focused on in this. And oddly enough, like, Varg actually, hasn't kind of turned on him. Like, he's one of the guys that he still thinks is doing, like, true black metal or whatever. Their stuff, Dark Throne, I like one of their albums, but a lot of theirs is just so like muddled and sounds like it was done in a garage that I have trouble listening to some of it. But whereas Mayhem, I can dig most of their stuff, so I would have to stick with Mayhem. And last, but 2 more. Richard 937860092. What do you guys think of Mono, the apparently new internet version of Slender Man that's popping up in children's YouTube
wait
video?
a second. This is the weird, freaky thing with the eyeballs. Have you guys seen this?
Yeah, he sent a picture of it. Let's see if I can send it to you.
It's real horrifying.
Yeah, it's not great.
Oh wait, is this?
Here,
Different?
I'll paste it in the chat.
Is this the chick thing with the eyeballs, or is that something else?
Yeah. It's,
Yeah, it's real
Oh, that's
messed up,
not
man.
good.
And this is again like this stuff. So there was an article today in Ars Technica about how there was some people going out and splicing this thing into YouTube videos that kids videos that was basically like a description of how to kill yourself with a razor. But it's like you would start the video and it's just cartoon content, and then it would just be inserted into the middle of it. In this same article, they mentioned this meme here, and like this kind of stuff as a parent is like terrifying. But as a kid, I probably would have thought it was sweet. So whatever. I don't know, man. Life's cyclical. It's weird, dude. Being a parent's weird.
And then last but not least from Matt Forley's van, he says, just watched some terrible movie where Michelle Rodriguez plays a dude. Now I'm thinking, what actors or actresses could pull this off?
Hello. Her name is
Swinton.
Tilda Swinton,
Yeah.
and nobody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with a guy playing a gal playing a guy. Like, whatever works. It's 2019, man.
I believe that was Bosom Buddies, Joe.
Yeah. Oh, man. That was a great show.
Bold-
and that is it
bold
for
stance.
the tweet. Was Bosom Buddies sexier?
Tom Hanks is young. Tom Hanks is pretty sexy.
Yeah. I mean, the women on there were very attractive too, but sure Tom Hanks. Sure.
Have you seen this? Have you seen this Bradley Cooper Lady Gaga situation, Joe? It's very sexy.
I don't see whatever. Like, I get that they, have
No,
smoldering eyes or something.
I don't think that they're doing it. I just think they're very sexy.
Yeah.
As we were talking about in Slack, this Bradley Cooper's beard in that movie, Joe.
Mhm.
It's a thing.
Yeah. I wish Cece had been on this episode because apparently she watched Lords of Chaos and then watched whatever that movie those two are in like immediately after, and I would love to hear like the compare and
Well, the
contrast.
funny thing was she said that movie unsettled her, and I'm just like, that's so on brand for CC.
Yeah. We actually watched Bohemian Rhapsody after Lords of Chaos, and it was kind of different ends of the
I
spectrum.
saw some clips from that movie. Every outdoor scene that I saw in that clip looked like CGI, like they were on a shitty green screen or something.
Man, I did not like it. Like, I appreciate what's his name, like playing Freddie Mercury, and I thought he did a great job. But like, it was pretty much like, oh, we're gonna go into a room. Hey, what should we do? All right, we'll write "We Will Rock You." Now we're gonna be like super famous. Like it made it seem like being Queen was like pretty much effortless.
I do love Queen. You know what's a good Queen song, Joe? Bicycle.
It's a great song.
Yeah.
What's the one in Shaun of the Dead? Don't Stop Me Now.
Don't Stop Me Now is good.
That's on my running mix, and I've 100% been caught just like belting out those lyrics running through a park.
I'm not very up on like the B-side stuff, but it's all really good. Like you can just throw those albums on and just go do something.
Yeah.
For complete cheesiness, when I lost my weight a few years ago and started running, "Don't Stop Me Now" was the first song I listened to at the start of every run for like the first year.
All that stuff is super good for running playlists.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. That's it for tweets. So we are done.
All right. Shelton, what's going on at Sophisticated Cinema? What do you guys got coming up here?
We're working on some things behind the scenes, which is my way of saying we're kind of lazy.
Okay.
And these TV people are blowing out new podcasts all the time.
But there is a current episode out, right? You can check on the Bloody Good Horror Patreon feed.
There is. It was a movie that we watched, and there were two of them. One of them was Vampiros Lesbos, and the other one was Oscar-winning movie The Favorite.
That's right. So you can check that out.
Yes.
Patreon.com/bloodygoodhorror. We're also on Spotify. Please, even if you don't intend to listen to us on Spotify, please search for us and follow, and that will hopefully help us get out to even more people. So it'd be a huge thing you could do for us. And leave us iTunes reviews if you like the show, or if you don't. Either way, you do you, Joe, is what I'm trying to say.
That's right.
So we were looking ahead. It looks like Greta comes out in theaters next week. I think we're gonna maybe skip that one in theaters and try to pick it up on DVD depending on the reception. But it looks like next week we will be doing Assassination Nation.
Ooh.
I'm pretty excited for this one, guys. And with that, that's gonna do it, guys. Hope you enjoyed our episode on Lords of Mayhem. We'll talk to you next
Chaos.
week. Yes, Lords of Chaos. Yes, we'll talk to you next week.
So long.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye.